Well, I mean, every candidate that's running for any office should exhaust every option before they concede to ensure that every vote has been legally counted. And I think the president is exhausting all of those remedies available to him, and rightly so. I mean, in his case, he had 72 million people vote for him. And in many of these states, the margin is too close to call, or there's concerns about how the vote was counted, and the president should exhaust the legal options available to him. And can I just, one quick point that I think you made in the introduction. We have a system in the United States. The states votes, the votes tallied, and then electors are assigned. Those electors then meet on December 14th to decide how they will cast their ballots. That's actually how the United States government works when it comes to choosing our president. So because a foreign leader has called, or because a television network has decided, doesn't make it so. In the state of Arizona, for example, the president is down about 12,000 votes. 95% of the vote is in of 3 million votes cast. That means that, you know, there's roughly 150,000 votes out of a 12,000 vote lead. There's plenty within that state alone. Those 11 electoral votes would shift if President Trump were to take the lead. So I think the point is that the system is made to allow for time to occur, to tally those ballots, for electors to meet. Just because a television network or a media organization decides that they want to project a winner doesn't make it so.
It's not just the one state that Joe Biden is ahead in. If you look at what is going in Pennsylvania, he is 50,000 votes ahead. There doesn't need to be a recount, does there? It's done.
Wait a second. Hold on. First of all, I agree with you. Joe Biden is ahead, and if he is declared the winner in those states, then he should be, inaugurated this next president. The electors will cast their vote for him. But it's not up to you to make that decision, right? There are votes out. Those votes have a right to be counted. There are military ballots that haven't been counted. There's a Supreme Court challenge to ballots that were tallied after Election Day on November 3rd. But it is not up to you or anyone else in the media to make that decision. Sure. It is up to the voters in that state and the secretaries of state. In Pennsylvania, it's a Democratic Secretary of State. When they certify the election, then that's it. But until then, it's not over, because a bunch of media folks decide that despite all those votes not being tallied, that they have decided, because of somehow they have expertise in this area. That's not how it works, despite what you want.
Of course, sir. I mean, would you be saying the same thing if it was Hillary Clinton who was saying that it's too close to call, there should be recounts? Would you be saying the same thing?
So it's a good question, because in 2004, I served as an elector from the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I actually have been a big believer well before that the electors by our system are actually the ones who cast it. So, yes, the question is, and why this is different, and for those people who may be just tuning into U.S. elections for the first time, if a candidate concedes, well, then that's up to them to do so. So if they concede to the other candidate and say, you have won, I'm not going to contest this election, that's up to them to do, right? And then, of course, the government can move through its transition process early because one of the two candidates has conceded. But in the year 2000, when neither George Bush nor Al Gore conceded, there was a 37-day recount. But, I will tell you the same, so yes, I have been on record since the early 2000s explaining how this process works. So I think you picked the wrong guest to pull that argument with.
But the point about Florida, it doesn't really apply to this. We're talking about 500 votes or so back in 2000. It's very different to what we're seeing now.
Again,
and ultimately, history.
You're missing
let
the
me
point.
finish, please.
It's
sir.
not
Let
about...
me finish, sir. I'm asking the questions. And also, custom dictates that the incumbent, if they do lose, then they move aside.
Yes. And as soon as the votes are tallied, if he loses, I think he should. But he has a right under our system to ask that the votes be counted. That's how it works. And I get it. In Florida, it wasn't a question of how many votes. It was within the margin of error. So they both, in that case, Al Gore actually tried to have military ballots excluded. So, it's interesting, but the point is that the system is set up to allow for a candidate to ask for a recount if it's within a certain amount, or to pose a legal challenge. President Trump has a right to do that. He's exercising that right. And as much as you and a lot of folks in the media don't like it, That's not how the system works. And just because Hillary Clinton chose to concede in 2016 doesn't mean Donald Trump does. But you're missing the point. Just because as soon as the vote is final and all the votes are cast and certified, if President Trump has exhausted his legal options and isn't the winner, then he should step aside and allow Joe Biden. But until then, he has a right and, frankly, an obligation of the 73 million people that voted for him to do so.
It's not a question of whether I like it or not. I'm just observing the democratic process in the United States. I mean, in terms of Donald Trump, what is going on?
No, but you're not. You're not actually.
But I am. But anyway, let's move on. What is going on in Donald Trump's head right now?
You're saying you're actually. No, you're cheapening our process. You're cheapening the process by acting as though that because media organization Real Clear Politics, which up until the other day was the gold standard in election, hasn't called Arizona, it hasn't called Pennsylvania, it hasn't called Georgia or Alaska. Somehow the media organizations that all talked about what the Real Clear Politic average was going up to the election have looked at that same organization and are now not recognizing that they're not calling this election. So my point is that if you want to pick off one or two, left-leaning organizations in this country and say that they've called it, that's up to them. That's their decision. But those states have not certified the vote. And to make it seem as though the president is not accepting defeat is a false narrative. He has a right to wait until the vote is certified.
Many would say that is Donald Trump and his lawyers who are cheapening the electoral process. Any other candidate would have stepped aside. If Donald Trump does lose and there are questions... If Donald
Any
Trump
other
does
candidate,
lose,
that's really interesting.
If Donald Trump, let me finish, please, sir. Again, I'm asking the question. If Donald Trump does eventually step aside, he does eventually concede, what is likely to happen? Can you see him running again in 2024?
Well, I mean, he is the biggest factor in the Republican Party right now. He has he'd have a right to do it. He has a huge following and the base is rock solid. He would definitely be the front runner in 2024. There's no question about it.
And what about the future of the Republican Party? Because it has fundamentally changed.
Yeah, and if you look at what we did in the House of Representatives, we picked up seats when all the same folks in the media said that the House was going to get a drubbing. It looks like we'll keep control of the Senate. Again, the media projected horrible outcomes on that. The president actually grew his popular vote by large margins, considering the narrative was that he was going to get killed. He was stronger with Hispanics, stronger with African Americans, stronger with Jewish Americans, all groups that the media said were going to run from him. So, I mean, I think that he is actually, when you look at vote totals, it doesn't match the narrative that the U.S. media was definitely trying to portray leading up to this election. We actually did better in state house races all around. So the Republican Party has actually done better and is stronger coming out of this election.
And looking at the United States right now from this side of the Atlantic, I think it's clear to everyone that the country is extremely polarized now. Once the dust finally does settle, if Donald Trump does concede in the coming weeks, will you rally behind President-elect Joe Biden? How does the country get back together?
Well, look, I mean, I think that, first of all, my view is I respect our democratic process. I've always believed that once, we settle our differences at elections and then we respect the office until the next election. But I do think that there's a difference here. It's the president who needs to set the tone, not me. I mean, I respect the office, whoever's in it. I've been in this game through Democrats and Republicans. I respect people who win elections, and then I believe that you go out and you settle your differences at the next one if you don't like them. But I got to be honest with you, it's Joe Biden who talks about unity, and yet everything that he's talked about, he's calling for unity, and yet talking about dismantling policies. The Democrats in this country are talking about creating lists of people who support President Trump. It's the cities, Washington, D.C., New York City, all these big cities weren't boarded up because it was Trump supporters that were going to riot and loot and vandalize and destroy property. It was the left. And that gets lost in this argument. It was the folks on the left.
You're also seeing Donald Trump supporters tooled up with weapons on the street as well, are you not?
In Texas, right, there was, which they're legal and they were allowed to do. There's a big difference between being able to exercise your Second Amendment right here in this country without infringing on somebody else and destroying and looting and vandalizing property. That's, so I get it. You want to justify this, but the reality is the boarding up of buildings, the protection, the police on every corner, it wasn't because of Donald Trump. All of these things that occurred prior to Election Day, you haven't seen the 72 million people that supported Donald Trump go out there and loot and riot and destroy and vandalize. That was the left that was threatening to do that, not the right.
You did see people trying to stop counting, though, didn't you?
Did what?
You saw people trying to stop the counting process.
No, if anything, they're asking it to all. The people who stopped the counting process were in Philadelphia and major strongholds in the Democratic Party. They literally stopped counting in Philadelphia and went home. They stopped counting in other places in Georgia and went home.
Did we not see that in Detroit and Michigan? His supporters trying to stop the process?
Stop the protest?
Process. Did we not see that in Detroit, Michigan?
I'm unaware of that. I do know that they stopped counting ballots during the night on election night in Philadelphia and went home for no explained reason. And nobody to this day has figured out why that happened. And that's occurred in several places. They have been locked out of places to observe the recount in several places that they've had to seek court orders to get back in on. So, I mean, again, I get the goal here, which is to justify what's happening. But at the end of the day, it's kind of interesting that the folks in the media are allowing this to occur by folks on the left and with reckless abandon, no sense of accountability.
What is the first job for President-elect Biden or Donald Trump if he does retain the White House? What should their number one job be as we head into 2021?
Well, I think number one is continue to get a hold of the coronavirus. We've seen a really positive development with this vaccine. So it's going to be to execute and deploy the vaccine to the nation to make sure that obviously the first responders and people who are vulnerable get it first and the rest of America. And obviously ensure that we continue to open the economy and make sure that people can get back to work.
Sean Spicer.
But I think they go hand in hand.
Sean Spicer, appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Thank you.